Yes, yes, we can hear you.
All right.
This
Wonderful.
is, this is Susan Lamb, and her talk today is Desire. You can't always get what you want. Susan holds a PhD in clinical psychology from Vanderbilt University. She was a psychotherapist for more than 46 years, working with individuals and couples. For more than 2 decades, the topic of desire on the life path has been a focus of her exploration and practice. She has drawn from her own experiences and these of clients and friends, as well as from psychological concepts, to distill understanding on the topic. Teachings from several wisdom traditions have guided the process. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. Well, I'm so happy that I get to be back with you this morning. Um, and happy that you came. Many of the people who were here last week and some new folks too. So I want to also thank the person who does the flyer. The flyers are beautiful. And this person is also quite intuitive. She has used red in this week's flyer. And that's a perfect color because we're going to be talking about the intensity that occurs when we are trying to get something that we desire in a relationship and it doesn't seem to be coming. I'll talk just a little bit for those of you who weren't here last week about the things that we talked about in our exploration last week. I talked about my own surprise at my reaction when I was invited to envision a garden in my back courtyard, the anger and fear and sadness that came up as I was afraid I couldn't come up with what I wanted, and compared myself to the Grinch who didn't think that he could create the Christmas that he would have wanted. And in both cases, we learned there was a little bit more going on than just trying to get what we wanted. Then we talked about a couple of my clients that I learned a lot from about desire. From one, I learned that when are we turn away from what we really want because we think we can't have it, that we often will create a sham of the desire. And sometimes that can even become an addiction. And then from another client, I learned as I got to watch him through his desire process, how helpful desires could be in focusing life energy. And he was particularly needing that focus as his life was quite unfocused and he was on the brink of suicide and even a psychotic kind of process. But deciding on goals that he could reach made such a difference. Yet, as we are taught in our traditions, he ran into the suffering that comes with desire, all the doubts and the fears that come up. And I learned that it takes everything we can find in our practices and our wisdom traditions to meet that suffering so that we have a chance to overcome it or help it dissolve. So today we begin with a story that takes place as I'm driving from Georgia, where I live, to North Alabama, just about an 8-hour drive. And my family lives in North Alabama, so it was a frequent trip. And I would assign myself certain thought topics for my drive, like what am I going to think about today? And so on this particular occasion, I was already involved in trying to figure out some of the stuff about desire. And so I assigned myself the task of unraveling two difficult circumstances that I was aware of, one in my own life and one in the life of a client. I'll tell you about the client first. She was wanting to have more depth discussions in her life partnership about spiritual matters, philosophical ideas. And she asked for that quite directly from her partner. And to her surprise, I find the desire process often surprises us. To her surprise, not only was he uninterested, but he saw the request as her trying to be over controlling in the relationship. And this was disconcerting to her. And she faithfully obsessed about how to talk about it that would help him see that there was nothing wrong with this request. So she would bring the topic up again and again, and always with the same result. In fact, as you could guess, it got worse each time she brought it up. I had seen them together in therapy and got to observe this, that her desire and her clinging to the desire, which by this point was not just for the conversations, but now it was that she wanted him to see her in a more benign way. And she wasn't getting it. And the more she asked, the more resistant he was. And then the situation in my own life involved a friend. It was an important friendship. And this friend had suggested after Christmas one year that three of us who were good friends get together and have a ceremony where we acknowledged our gifts, the things that we were bringing into the world. And this seemed like a lovely idea. So we gathered at her home one night to do it. I knew that I was going to have to, I had a time limit on how long I could be there because I had to go to a middle school basketball game, at least the second half. So we did the expression of our gifts. Those of you who've been to the full moon ceremony at Great Tree know that this is very similar to the flower watering part of that ceremony where we acknowledge a gift. So we did this, and the friend who had suggested the ceremony had made this beautiful assemblage of symbols of her gifts. And the other two of us had not done that. So as we went through the ceremony, my gifts didn't seem real. They were all sort of in the ethereal realm. Hers were right out there in front of us. And the other friend had not made an assemblage either. But of course, I was concerned about mine not being real. So when it was time for me to go, and I was saying goodbye, my friend very kindly said, there's something that we can do that will bring closure for you as you leave. And so I said, I would love for you to acknowledge my gifts. And as with the client, not only did she not do that, but she told me that she thought my request was insincere. And she couldn't seem to describe what made her think that or what that meant. But I had to go. I went to the basketball game, and we were together frequently, so I knew I would have a chance to talk with her about it again. At that point, I guess I believed that clear communication would solve any problem. And so just like my client, I kept trying to talk about it in a way that would help her see how sincere it was. I explained where it had come from, that need. And as with the client, the more we talked about it, the worse it got. It triggered her resistance, and she held on to that perception. So on my trip, now we're back in the car going to Alabama, and I'm thinking maybe I can unravel this. What is this about when we ask for something in a relationship, and the more we ask, the more it's refused? Well, as you might guess, I was unable to unravel it in those 8 hours. Um, I arrived at my mom's house in a bit of an agitated state from having thought about it so much. So, as I greeted my mother, as I gave her a hug, I was looking over her shoulder at her television set that was on for the evening news. And there was a tragic story about a mother and two children who had been swept from their car by the floodwaters of a flash flood in the creeks in North Alabama. The mother had been rescued, but the children were not. So this sort of seemed like the kinds of feelings that get triggered when one is longing for something and we can't have it. It's not coming. And there was a counterpoint to that story over the next several days when I would think about another story of a car trip in North Alabama when my husband and my sister and I were in the car together, and we were traveling along a country road, and it was at night, and we came to a place where there was a detour. There was a nice clear sign that said detour, pointed the way, but above and behind that was one of these rectangular signs that gives you the warning in very graphic imagery. It said bridge out and showed a car going over the precipice into a chasm. And my sister, who was in the back seat, seeing that, screams. We are, of course, miles from where the bridge was out, but she was so frightened by the imagery. So these would play side by side in my mind, the image of being swept away by the emotions versus being so frightened by them that we turn away from them and turn away from the situation that's triggering them. This became the Rolling Stones song, "You Can't Always Get What You Want." And the counterpoint to that being the teaching from the Gospels, when Jesus is instructing, knock and the door shall be opened, seek and ye shall find, ask and it shall be given. So back and forth, like, can we expect that we will be able to get what we want? Or we just not get what we want? So I was there several days. We were coming up on Sunday, and I always went with my mother to her Sunday school class and her church service on Sundays when I was there. And I thought, well, who knows? Maybe I haven't been able to unravel this on my own. Maybe there'll be something in the Sunday school class or in the church service that will help me find a synthesis. They keep being these opposites. What brings them together at a higher level? There was nothing in the Sunday school class. We went to the church service, and it turned out it was Transfiguration Sunday. If you know the story that has come to be called the Transfiguration in the Gospels, Jesus has taken two of his disciples aside from the group. And as they stand together, he is suddenly in the clouds. And on one side of him is Elijah. On the other side, I believe it's Moses. And his face is illumined so brightly. His clothes are bright with light. And there's a voice coming from the mist saying, "This is my beloved son. Hear ye him." Now, up until this point, these disciples, they were really not aware of what was going on. They knew this was a teacher that they wanted to follow, but they had no idea. So they got it. Something more is happening here. Those of you who were here last week, you know that that was what happened with the Grinch too. He got it. Something more is happening here. And so I start thinking about the more that is happening when we're needing something, wanting something, can't get it. And I remembered the first time that Tejo came to Savannah, after her Dharma talk at the end of a day of meditation, one of the participants asked, do you use the koans, the riddles, in your Zen practice? And Tejo explained, no, I asked my teacher about that, Katagiri Roshi, like, do we use the koans? And he said, oh, Tejo, the student brings their own koan. Aha, the more that's happening here. These are koans, these are riddles. There's more to understand. Carl Jung used to say that patients would come into psychotherapy with a problem. They would come seeking a solution. And he said, there is rarely a solution to a problem. That's not what happens. What happens is there is growth. There is growth in consciousness so that eventually we rise above the problem. The problem somehow isn't a problem anymore. So I will tell you that I remember when Tejo said that about this, the student brings their own koan. Like, I can remember a certain relief even then, and certainly then on this occasion in church, when I thought of it, like, oh, this is not something that anybody is doing wrong. I can quit trying to figure out who's right, who's wrong, how to convince somebody of something. This is a koan. Accept it. So back to the knock and the door shall be open. It occurs to me, all right, I've been knocking on the wrong door. The client was knocking on the door. It's the door to knock on is not how can I get what I want or how can I be seen the way I want to be seen. The door to knock on is what is there to understand here? What is the possibility of awakening here? So I can tell you that over the months and years, those two dilemmas that I agitated myself with on the way to Alabama, clues kept emerging with my friend. Actually, she had given me a clue pretty early on in the process when she said, you know, since most of what we believe is not true anyway, perhaps it's not that helpful to keep communicating about it. We might say, since what we believe or what we think we know is so incomplete, there's limited utility in continuing to try to wrestle it to the ground. It's sort of like, you know, what we call these days disinformation. We keep exchanging disinformation. It doesn't take us very far. So the clues that emerged over the months and years, in addition to the one she'd given me right there at first, I realized that we were involved in powerful energies. That's why people do rituals and ceremonies, because they're powerful. But we were doing it without a container. We didn't have a wisdom tradition we were working within. We didn't have a teacher. We didn't even have the ceremony so that we were all doing the same thing. And we were all starting and ending at the same time. No wonder we had such a hard time with it. With the client situation, the biggest clues came when they went to a marriage enrichment retreat. And they were asked by the leader, what are you most afraid of in this relationship? And he had answered, I'm afraid of being seen as ineffectual. She had answered, I'm afraid that the relationship will be shallow. Well, when they heard each other's fears, now this triggers compassion and patience, so that over the years, they were able to move toward what each needed. She, once she quit trying to wrestle it to the ground, was able to just day by day move toward the kinds of depth communication that she longed for. That came. And he was able to know that he was seen as effective. He was effective. He was a very effective person. And that became clear to him too. So these things evolved. The clues enabled the riddle to open its wisdom to all the people in these situations. Now, the last question that I want us to be with today is, so how, these are powerful energies, these energies of longing for something in these important relationships and not being able to get it. And by the way, as that riddle unfurled itself in church that Sunday, of course, I remembered the second line of the Rolling Stone song. If you try sometime, you just might find you get what you need. And of course, you need that way more than you need what you think you need. So how are we to be with this intensity as the riddles allow us to move toward our awakening? So I have another trip to Alabama story here, last one for the day. So in this one, this was a trip that I was taking when my father was in his final illness before he died. And I was wondering how to be, what attitude to bring into his dying. It was clear he was not going to recover. So it didn't seem like my focus. In Sanskrit, they call that sort of attitude a bhavana. So what bhavana was I to bring? So it wasn't one of hoping for recovery. And it wasn't one of trying to push him to let go before he was ready. I had tried that. We all had let him know that when he was ready, that we were okay with his going. But on one occasion, he had told me that he'd had a dream about his mother the night before. And I had said, oh, Pop, I bet she's calling you. And he had said, nobody's calling me. So, all right, I get it. This is not my decision to make. So how am I to be with it? Well, what came into my mind's eye was an image from an illustration from a talk I had heard. And you may have heard this too, that there was a small museum that had a couple of vases that were quite plain in their ivory glazes, but they were in a lighted case, and visitors would linger a long time gazing at these vases. And if you read the card in the case, it said that the glaze had been created with the kintsugi process, which is a Japanese ceramics process. And in that process, the glaze is cracked and crazed, probably purposely, and then it is repaired, so to speak, with gold dust. They put gold dust in all the cracks and the crazing so that in the lighted case, all of that gold shines forth. So it's called golden repair. So I loved that image when I heard it, and it came into my mind like, oh yeah, that's what I would like. I would like to see the gold in his cracked outer form, his depleted cognitive process, and in our whole situation, which of course is painful, to see the gold there. I had no idea how that could be or what that meant, but I was surprised several days later when I was in his hospital room. The nurse had called me in. She thought she would prepare him for the ambulance ride to the nursing home where he was to be transferred. And she sent me to a waiting room so that he could have privacy to be bathed and dressed. But it turned out she couldn't do it by herself because he was combative with everything that was left of his life force. He was protecting himself from what he perceived as harm. So she called me to come in and help her, and I soothed him first. He was quite soothed until she had to start trying to dress him again. And then there was no choice. I had to hold his wrist down so that he couldn't scratch her and claw at her and bite her. And he looked up at me with such puzzlement. Why are you trying to hurt me? And of course, that's painful that he doesn't understand. But that was the moment. That was the moment that the gold appeared. Over the following days, I wondered why did it come? What is this illumination at this moment? And I realized that I had inadvertently asked for a kind of mindful presence that I've come to think of as illumined mindfulness, or I guess like golden repair. We could call it golden mindfulness. And it is mindfulness. I would call it mindfulness plus, except that, our master teachers, when they are leading us into mindful states, they lead us there. It's not mindfulness plus. This is mindfulness. I came to Great Tree's memorial Zoom service for Thich Nhat Hanh after he died. And people described what it was like to read his words. And I remember what it was like to read that description of mindfulness for the first time. He led us there. It's hard to describe because what we say is it is presence with acceptance, without attachment, without resistance. But as most of you know, it's so much more than those words say. The best one sentence description that I have read was by a teacher named Arjuna Ardag. And he said, it is important for attention to come into this moment with compassion so that attention can fall in love with the moment. And that's what it feels like. And so many of us have been blessed to have those moments in our lives. So I have a visual of that I think describes it better than words. This happened at a writing retreat that Tejo was co-leading with a writer back before Gray Tree had come to be. And in one of the early exercises, I was talking with a young woman who was trying to make her living as a writer. And of course, all of her negative messages and shame were coming up. You'll never be a writer. You're not good. It's not going to happen. And she said that what she was doing was writing all of these messages on cards. And then she took children's socks and stuffed them with a filling and then tied a ribbon around the end. So now this looks a bit like a little fish, and tied the message to the fish. And she said, I have so many now. I have 2 paper bags full, grocery bags. And I said, well, what are you going to do with them? She said, I don't know. They're riding around in the back of my car, the back seat. So I said, perhaps you could bring them into the retreat and maybe someone will know what to do with them. I don't know what to do with them. So in the final circle, when it got to be her turn, we were sitting on the floor. She turns around, she gets her bags and dumps them into the middle of the circle. It tells us what they are. And of course, nobody knows what to do with them, really. But Tejo, on her knees, goes out to the middle of the circle and embraces an armload of these messages. And then the rest of us, in our turns, go and embrace the rest of them. Nobody said a word. You know how Zen is. It's very spare. So nobody explains what's happening. The next time Teja came to Savannah, of course, I wanted to know, what was that for you? And so I asked her in a question and answer period after I had described it. And Tejo explained. She said, in my practice, I have learned that when those things come up, those are our best chances. And I won't say it right, I'm sure, Tejo, but to move toward awakening. And she said, so I really love them. Illumined mindfulness. That's what it takes to meet the pain of the riddles in our lives when we can't get what we want and we're waiting to find some time that we get what we need. So that's what I have to say this morning. And now it's your turn. Thank you for listening. And we're ready for comments, questions, whatever feedback you want to give. And thank you for that in advance, because I need it. I want it.
Are you there? Thank you, Susan. I too much. I can't, I don't even know. I don't even remember those stories you told, but how nice.
Yeah.
But
Yes,
thank you.
they've
Wow.
moved on, but they're here.
Yeah. So I don't have anything really to say, but I just want to say thank you, and maybe something will come up when someone else says something.
Yes.
Oh,
Thank you. This is Trey.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. It was very illuminating. And yeah, I guess something that came up for me during it was the relationship between desire and fear. And one that I've been noticing in myself, a desire that I've been noticing in myself, and then some people around me. I'm finishing up my graduate degree in counseling, and I'm interning at the local school, UNCA. It's a college, so I'm working with undergraduate students, and it's this desire for perfection, um, and I see it as it kind of shows up as problematic in that it is sometimes debilitating, and sometimes there's this aversion that myself and that my clients can't get through to complete assignments and work, because there's this desire for it to be perfect, and this fear that it's not going to be, and there's judgment there. Some If you have any thoughts about that. I guess I don't know if that's really a question.
Well, it's interesting. The first thing that came up for me was thinking about you beginning your career, your vocation in that role, and what that's like, because of course we want to be perfect helpers too. We're working with their desires for perfection, and we have our own. I had an occasion some years ago to somebody approached me. Now, my first practicum when I was in training was in Nashville, and I was up in West Virginia having breakfast and at a restaurant, and somebody came up to me and said, "I was your first client." I'm like,
Oh, no.
"Oh no." Because I remember what I was like. I was somewhat debilitated myself. We were using reel-to-reel tape recorders, to tape the sessions, and then your supervisor listens like, oh.
Yes.
So, after expressing dismay, I went on to ask her about what was happening with her, and she had become a counselor. And I thought, well, I guess I showed her you don't have to be perfect. But yes, that is the suffering that comes up, isn't it? That we want something, and so quickly, unless it is the simplest of desires, like I want a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, there's the question of, can I do it? And any experiences, it doesn't even have to be experiences of failure. Maybe we've never had any bad failures, but every time we've been afraid of failing, it's all stored inside, and it gets triggered, and we are likely then to procrastinate with getting assignments done or whatever the project is. So, I guess there too, it's so important to learn to face that fear, because we have to face it in order. I've been working with my acupuncturist on transitions, and it turns out there are transitions constantly in our lives. For a student, they're going to class all day, and then it's the afternoon and it's time to work on this assignment that they're afraid of. So how do they transition from listening, taking in, and now doing their work? And it's like you have to get over a hump that it involves that fear. And we will be talking next time about more consciously accessing the joy that is in our desires, because the fear comes up absolutely automatically when we're in a moment to move toward them. So we'll talk more about how to do that, because we need the joy and the desire to counteract the fear and to give us that push. Thank you for your.
When you say that, I what sort of woke up in me is that even to accept the joy is to let go of the fear, in a sense.
Yeah, at
But
least
to accept the joy is not so easy. What?
I said, at least for that moment. Like, okay, I've got it. The fear is there. Now, where is the joy that made me want this to begin with? Want this degree, want to take this course? Where is that? Let me find it and use it. Thank you. Other questions or comments? Anybody else ever have trouble trying to get what they want? Finding they get what they need?
I'd like to just make a comment. I came in late. I thought this started at 9:30, but it sounded really interesting. Last night I was watching Christiana Amanpour, and she was interviewing a Black author, and the book is about finding joy in Blackness. And she talked a lot. It was really interesting about how yes, there's a lot of suffering in Black history, but there's also, it was really meaningful to me in terms of my own life to look at when there are areas, when there are places to glean, I don't glean if that's the right word, to be joyful. She was talking about, these two slaves, or this one slave woman, I forget her name, but she's fairly well-known poet, and she had all these friends in the Rhode Island area, and they corresponded regularly, and one of her letters said, pass the time with so-and-so, pass the evening with so-and-so. And she pointed out how this woman was a slave. Not Harriet Tubman, that's someone entirely different, but that magic of spending the time with an intimate evening with someone who was close to her was really meaningful. And that, even, and the sort of complicated feelings that African-Americans now, scholars or anyone reading about pain and suffering that clearly is well documented in a slave's life, it makes it, if you just emphasize that, it creates a inhuman person, that it's human to have these moments where life is meaningful. And so I just thought of that when you were talking.
Thank you. The point that you bring up is an important one, that we don't just have one emotion at a time, that there is inside us this array, and there will perhaps be the one that is capturing our attention, and And that very often is fear or anger, what we think of as the negative emotions, but that there is always more, that, and we have the ability to choose to see more than one, to see more than the one that is automatically capturing our attention. We can, in these situations where we have these riddles, curiosity is a powerful one, you know, rather than focusing just on what I'm not getting, to be curious about the process. Has
And I would also add that COVID was a huge lesson in that.
Mhm.
COVID isolation.
Yeah, that there were so many different things that we experienced. Some what we think of as positive and some that we think of as negative. Yeah. So true.
Just to interrupt, the time frame that the we have on the ads for these talks is Eastern Standard Time. So if you're in Central, you are here at 9:30, and that was good, but we're at a different 9:30. So if you'd like to come next week, it's really 8:30 for you. Right? Did I do that right? The math right? Okay.
That explains it. I didn't catch that. I usually work, my bosses are on the East Coast and I have to constantly reorient myself in terms of time, but I didn't pay attention because I always forget that Asheville is in a different time zone.
Well, we usually have it on the calendar thingy, but we didn't this time, so.
Okay. Anything else? Anything anybody wants to add to the mix here? Well, we have
I'll
somebody.
jump in just for a second. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, yeah, I think, the most difficult thing for me when pursuing or following a desire, of course, there's the often intense wrestling with it, and the perfectionist in me trying too hard to pursue it. And I do have my times of curiosity with it, but I think there's I don't know. I think I have to go through some of the wrestling in order to see the different angles of it. If I'm always fascinated by shadows of things, and I think sometimes I just have to wrestle with those shadows, and then suddenly I'm able to see some beauty in them that I wouldn't, if I just tried to be zen or calm or peace filled, I wouldn't see the different angles and see that there's even beauty sometimes in the darkness.
Mhm. Yes, thank you for that. So true. I mean, it is the very act of feeling the pain and the darkness being present that keeps us on the path, in a sense. And you talk about, yeah, darkness and shadows, that they have their own pattern and their own beauty.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that to us. Well, if we're, shall we give back the merit? Tejo?
Thank you very much, Susan. And next week, the name of your talk is?
I think it is practicing joy and desire or something like that. I don't have it,
Okay. Okay.
but it is about I had started out with something about practicing the bliss and desire and decided that wasn't a very Zen word. And so use joy instead.
Yeah, we aren't a blissful group. May the merit of this practice
May the merit of this practice
benefit all beings
benefit all beings
and bring peace.
and bring peace.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Susan. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.